I've been toying with the idea of switching from my triple monitor setup to a single ultra-wide monitor for a while, and when I saw Samsung's 49-inch Odyssey G95C on sale for just $680, typically around $1,000, I knew it was time to finally make the change. In this video, I'll review the G95C and go over all of its pros and cons and standout features. I'll also discuss whether or not my switch to an ultra-wide monitor was the right decision, as well as go over why the G95C may or may not be the right monitor for your needs. Just real quick, it's important to note that there are a number of Samsung 49-inch Odyssey G9 ultra-wide monitors currently available. My decision at the time of purchase really came down to either getting the G95C, this display, which has a VA panel, or getting the G91SD or G93SC, both of which have OLED panels. The biggest determining factor in why I chose the G95C over the G91SD and G93SC is simply due to the fact that the G95C, the one I bought, was on sale for just $680. It's normally around $1,000, while the G91SD was priced at $980 and the G93SC was priced at $880, and that one was also on sale. The G91SD also has a lower refresh rate at 144 Hz than the G95C and G93SC do. Those both have a refresh rate of 240 Hz. But even if the G91SD and G93SC were priced similarly to the G95C, I still would have opted for the G95C. I use my desktop primarily for work as I do a lot of content creation, graphics design, and video editing, and while OLED panels are better for gaming, they are considered to be the less desirable option for productivity work. Not to mention my previous monitor was an LED monitor that suffered from burn-in after just a couple years of use. So with such a big investment and with my dual needs of both work and gaming, the G95C seemed to be the perfect option for my needs. And of course, it was priced much better than all of the other 49-inch ultra-wides available at the time I bought it. For specs and features, the G95C is a 49-inch monitor that comes with a 32:9 aspect ratio panel that has a 5120 by 1440 resolution, a whopping 240 Hz refresh rate, and a 1 millisecond gray-to-gray response time. The G95C uses a vertical alignment or VA LCD panel. The advantages of VA panels are that they typically offer better text clarity and are less of a factor for burn-in than are the ever-popular OLED panels. Again, those two advantages were a big part of my decision to opt for the VA panel version of this display over the OLED versions. However, if you're looking for a display primarily for gaming, I'd strongly recommend you consider the OLED version, as OLED panels will offer the better overall experience there. The G95C is a curved monitor that has a curvature rating of 1000R, and this display does feature AMD's FreeSync technology, and it is G-Sync compatible as well, so you will get to use adaptive sync technology for as smooth of an in-game experience as possible. Being such a large display, this monitor requires a large stand to support it. The display itself weighs 23.4 pounds, and the stand weighs an additional 10 pounds itself, so 34.4 pounds overall. As it is such a heavy monitor, you might be wondering how hard it is to get it unboxed and set up. Fortunately, Samsung has an easy way to unbox their G9 series displays and lift them out of the box. First, you assemble the stand, then with the box lying right side up, so the back of the monitor is facing up, you simply attach the monitor stand to the back of the display, and then you lift the entire thing up. I'd recommend that you unbox the monitor on the ground close to the desk where you're going to place it. That way you can just lift the monitor up and put it onto your desk. With the monitor powered on, the first thing I did was go into the monitor settings. There's a button on the bottom of the panel on the underside of the Samsung logo. It's a circular button in the center of 4 directional buttons surrounding it. You need to click this center button to power on the display. When the monitor is powered on and you're into Windows, and you click on this middle button, you get a quick menu that gives you access to an expanded menu, Samsung's eye care feature, which lets you filter out blue light at varying degrees. You also get a power off option and a source option. The expanded menu offers a lot of different setting options, including the ability to dial in the screen with various sliders, change the refresh rate, toggle on and off adaptive sync, configure the RGB lighting on the back of the display, set up a virtual aim point, which just puts a crosshair on your screen, set up picture-in-picture, run the self-diagnosis feature if you're having problems, and run software updates. After scrolling through all of the settings, I just decided to leave everything on the default setting, and with the monitor all set up, it was time to start testing it out by playing some games on it. Again, while the OLED version of Samsung's Odyssey G9 lineup would have been better options purely for gaming use cases, I still found the G95C to be excellent for gaming. The display still provides high-end visuals, and the 240Hz refresh rate and adaptive sync capabilities provide an incredibly smooth experience. I'm not an expert on monitors, so I can't give you a detailed breakdown of how this monitor stacks up to other similarly spec'd and similarly priced models, but I can say that for me, picture quality was not an issue. What did stand out to me though is how much different gaming feels on an ultra-wide display. To test this monitor, I played a number of games on it, and I was most surprised by how many games easily supported 5120 by 1440 resolution, and also how much of an advantage playing on an ultra-wide display seemed to offer in certain titles. It almost feels like I was cheating in games like Fortnite and Rocket League, where I was able to add a ton of extra peripheral vision. But as I understand, other competitive titles like Valorant don't support playing at ultra-wide resolutions, so this advantage isn't universal for all competitive titles. A game like Rocket League played very well on this display. This is a game that benefited greatly from the extra screen resolution, and since it isn't too demanding of a game, I was able to get a high enough frame rate to fully utilize the 240Hz refresh rate this display comes with. However, there are some downsides to playing on an ultra-wide monitor that are going to vary from game to game. In this section, I'll go over some potential problems you'll want to consider before you choose the G95C or any other ultra-wide display for that matter. Since most games are designed to be played at 16:9 aspect ratio, even the games that do support ultra-wide formats still have some issues where the UI ends up in unintuitive locations. As just one example, in Fortnite, the guns and building material menu in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen makes sense at 16:9 aspect ratio, but on an ultra-wide display, it is almost silly how far out of your direct vision it is. A lot of games with fixed UIs are going to have issues like this on an ultra-wide display, and without modding, there's no way around this. In a game like Fortnite, it's not a huge deal, as most seasoned players won't need to constantly check the UI, but in other games, it could ruin the experience. Of course, the easy fix to this UI problem would be to just play the game in windowed mode. You'll lose the awesomeness of having all of that extra vision, but if awkward UIs are too difficult for you to handle, you at least aren't forced into using them. The other important factor that you'll need to consider before you purchase the G95C or any other ultra-wide monitor is that the higher resolution display is going to create more work for your PC. Using the G95C as an example, its 5120 by 1440 resolution gives it nearly as many pixels as a 16:9 aspect ratio 4K display. Not to mention its higher refresh rate will require even more powerful components in order to achieve a high enough average frame rate to really take advantage of the faster display. If your PC can only push 50 frames per second in Fortnite, you'd waste a lot of money on a monitor like this, since you really wouldn't be able to take full advantage of it. As an example, my main work system only has an NVIDIA RTX 2060 GPU in it, along with an Intel Core i7-13700F processor. It did fine in Fortnite at performance settings, where it averaged over 100 frames per second. However, that's still well shy of the 240 frame per second average I would need to fully utilize the G95C's 240Hz refresh rate. In Cyberpunk 2077, a much more graphics-intensive game, I was only able to get around 40 frames per second on the ultra non-ray tracing settings. And in Red Dead Redemption 2, at just the highest balance preset, I was only able to average around 37 frames per second. If I were using this monitor mainly to play graphics-intensive titles, I would definitely need a GPU upgrade to fully utilize the specs it offers. So do make sure that if you are considering getting this display, that you do have a PC that can perform at a high enough level to justify using it. Overall though, in the games I played that support 32:9 aspect ratio, I felt like playing on the G95C and just on an ultra-wide display in general was a real game changer. When it comes to productivity and creative work, the G95C really shines. The biggest advantage here is obvious. You just get an insane amount of screen real estate on a single panel. Whether I'm editing videos, writing, or juggling multiple browser tabs, the sheer width makes my day-to-day work feel less cramped. For video editing, this monitor has been a godsend. Being able to see so much more of the timeline at once makes scrubbing through footage far more efficient. That said, not everything is perfect. Recording your screen or gameplay on an ultra-wide like this can be a little tricky if you also create content. Since the native resolution of the monitor is 32:9, trying to turn that into a standard 16:9 video means you either have to crop out a huge chunk of the sides, or you'll have to size down the ultra-wide video to fit in a 16:9 aspect ratio, so you'll have thick black bars above and below. The other option is to force your games into a 16:9 aspect ratio before you go to record. Neither of these options feels ideal though. This won't be a deal breaker for most gamers who aren't recording, but if you do stream or make YouTube videos, you'll need to keep this in mind when switching to an ultra-wide display. Multitasking with browser windows and apps is generally great on a monitor like this, but there are some quirks to it that you need to be aware of. Some websites don't scale well when you shrink them down into narrow panes, so you'll run into occasional layout issues when you're running a multi-browser setup. Of course, there are ways to adjust for these kinds of issues. You can quickly adjust the width of both connected panels by hovering over the border between the two and adjusting as needed. Windows does offer some snapping functionality out of the box, but Microsoft's PowerToys Fancy Zones will allow you to customize those configurations a bit more. With Fancy Zones, you can build custom grids so you can set up the exact workflow you want. I found the default options that come with Windows to be enough for my needs, but if you wanted something more advanced, Fancy Zones will be useful for you. Another thing that took a little bit of time for me to get used to is the fact that some apps, when centered on the display, can look slightly off due to the curvature of the screen. It's a little weird at first if you're coming from a flat monitor, however, you do adapt to this quickly, but just note that it will feel a little off initially. Okay, with all of that being said, the question is, has this monitor been worth it for me? And without hesitation, I can say that this monitor has been an excellent upgrade for me and 100% worth the $680 I paid for it. It has allowed me to declutter my desktop without losing too much of the real estate I actually utilized on my triple monitor setup. And the screen has been great both for working and gaming. Hopping into competitive titles like Rocket League and Fortnite felt like I was borderline cheating with all of the additional information I got with the added screen on my peripherals. I suspect for any esports title that has native support for 5120 by 1440 displays, you'll gain a competitive advantage with an ultra-wide monitor like the G95C. Playing visually rich titles that support ultra-wide displays was great as well. Cyberpunk felt even more immersive in an ultra-wide setup. And for games that don't support ultra-wide aspect ratios, it's as simple as playing at traditional 16:9 aspect ratio and playing with black bars on the side. The only real downside to playing on an ultra-wide monitor would seem to be if you're a content creator. If you play games at the native 32:9 aspect ratio and then you try to scale them down into a 16:9 aspect video, they're not going to look right. So you can't have the best of both worlds, both playing at 32:9 aspect ratio and outputting to 16:9 aspect ratio. With exception for in titles where cropping out the sides of the game doesn't change the captured video enough to negatively impact the viewing experience of that video. Also, if gaming is your main priority, I'd recommend getting the OLED version of this monitor, that's the G93SC, as it will give you an even better viewing experience. As I needed a monitor for both work and gaming, I opted for the VA panel version, the G95C. Overall, this monitor is amazing, especially at its current deal price of just $680. I would have bought it at $1,000 though, but got lucky on this limited time deal. If you are interested in getting this monitor, I have left a link to it in the description below. That is an affiliate link, and if you do purchase through it, I may earn a commission. Of course, that really helps this channel out, but of course you can just go straight to Amazon or Samsung and get the G95C there as well. In any case though, that does it for this review. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.